The remainder of the story, The Enemy, 4 much shorter sections than the one that we've already looked at, deal not with the issue of the whether to let the prisoner live, whether to treat him. That's already been settled for Sadao and his wife. It deals with the issue of what to do with him now. The general becomes a character in the story now, not merely referred to as on the first page, but an active character. And Buck sets up relatively cleverly, perhaps wanting too much to have a happy ending, sets up a situation where both Sadao and the prisoner are able to escape. It starts off with the young man waking up, and except for the line, "Guts, they got my guts," while he's actually unconscious, he speaks his first lines in the story, and it's important that he becomes more of a true human character here and not just a body, not just a patient. It underlines the issue for Sadao and his wife that this is a human being and not just an enemy that should be killed. He finds out early on that Hana can speak English and that she has been in America, so he's not surprised that Sadao speaks English, and there are some interesting exchanges here. Buck does a lot in this story to keep it from being a simple sentimental story. She wants to make it clear that this really is a difficult issue for Sadao, and for Tom, the young sailor, as well. They are each other's enemies. Sadao is not simply going to say, "I care for you, I care for all people." The young man is not going to say, "Oh, then the Japanese must be all right." There's a lot of difficulty and some coldness between them. Sadao says to him, "You are a prisoner of war. Don't tell me your name," because then he would be tempted to use it against him. And the young man just turns away and bitterly says, "Okay." Later on, he says, "I ought to thank you, doctor, for having saved my life." At the beginning of page 486, Sadao says, "Don't thank me too early." In other words, I may still hand you over to be killed, or try to get someone to kill you, as in fact he does end up doing. He sees the scars on his neck, and then I think, like Hana thinking about that the Japanese can actually be cruel, Sadao probably assumes these are whip scars or scars of some other torture from when he was a prisoner. So all the ambiguity of the moral situation is really made clear. As I said in the first video, the servants play an important role in the story by showing a different reaction. While all this is going on, Hana comes back to Sadao and says that the servants are going to quit if they keep him there. We meet not just Yumi now, but the old gardener and the cook. I think there's a wonderful detail, a disgusting but perfect one, on page 485 in the middle of the left column. The cook breaks a bird's neck and lets the blood flow into the roots of a vine while the bird is still alive and fluttering. This shows the brutality underneath this civilization and the kind of violence that's underneath the story that we always know is there because there's a war going on, even if it's just symbolized here by the cook and the bird rather than being openly shown. The next two sections focus heavily on the general, and as authors sometimes do, Buck plunges us right into the scene. After the asterisks on page 486, "Of course," the general said weakly, "I understand fully." Clearly, Sadao has already told the general the whole story. We might be surprised as readers. He had seemed compassionate. Now he has betrayed the prisoner to the general. So he has, in fact, now done what any supposedly patriotic Japanese person would do and told his commanding officer, as it were, about the enemy. Interestingly, Buck decides to make the general have been in the U.S. also. He says in the same line, "I took a degree in Princeton, in New Jersey." And I think she does that so that Sadao and Hana, having been in America, is not the sole reason why they are compassionate toward the prisoner. It's something that they share with the general, and yet the general, of course, says he is going to hire killers to have this man killed. The general, again, as I said, shows selfishness where he says, "You cannot be arrested," top of the next column. "Suppose you were condemned to death and the next day I had to have my operation." In other words, I don't care about you. I just think you're the best of doctors. And a couple of paragraphs later, he wishes he could combine the German ruthlessness with the American sentimentality. I think I know enough about what the Japanese wartime government and army did to say they had the German ruthlessness. But once again, the general is such a cruel man, not thinking about other people, that he says, "I could be sure you would not murder me while I was unconscious." Because, of course, part of the price for being that kind of person is not trusting other people as well. And so the general comes up with the idea that he should simply be killed, that is, the American soldier, Tom. If Sadao turned him over, then Sadao would be in a lot of trouble for having saved his life and for not having turned him over earlier. So the general decides, "I will send assassins to kill him." Sadao goes back, talks to Tom once again, and he, interestingly, is still concerned with how he is healing. He looks at the scar on page 487. Then we have the nights when Sadao is waiting for the killers to come and kill his patient. He sleeps very poorly, as one might expect. When he hears noises, he is upset. When he finally helps the young man escape, he tells himself once again, remember that we do not necessarily believe Buck as the narrator. Sometimes authors even have their narrative voices, not just their characters, say things that the reader is not meant to fully believe. Near the bottom of page 487, after Tom says he's well now, he could not go through another night. It was not that he cared for this young man's life. It was not worth the strain. He is pretending that he thinks nothing for Tom after all these conversations with him and after saving his life, but that he simply doesn't want his sleep disturbed by waiting for assassins to come into his house and kill him. And so he speaks about the islands, which, as I mentioned before, come back into the story. The islands just off the coast, and that a fishing boat might be able to go after him and save him there. I think Buck has a nice detail that we never find out whether that happened. We do know that Sadao gives him a boat, that he helps him row out to the island, that he even gives him food, and we never find out whether the young man escaped or not. Partly, I think this is just suspense, which is a familiar effect in fiction, and partly it's because Buck wants to say, I'm focusing completely on how Sadao faced this situation and how he faced the moral question. When Sadao no longer has to worry about Tom one way or the other, we, the readers, will not know about him either. Then we have an almost detective story cleverness in the twist that occurs in the plot later on. Sadao has told the truth to the general repeatedly. He told him about the young man, and the general supposedly sent assassins. Now he tells him that the young man escaped. Yes, Excellency, he escaped. The general says, I promised I would kill him, didn't I? Well, I was just thinking about my illness. I thought of nothing but myself, he says, at nearly the end of page 488. We know already he's the kind of man who does. So the general, rather than Sadao, is the one who's in trouble. He says, you are a good man, you will be rewarded, because Sadao now has the general, in the standard phrase that Buck uses, in the palm of his hand. I can swear to your loyalty, Excellency. Sadao knows that he told the general the truth. The general forgot to send the assassins. That's why they didn't come. And so not only has Tom been saved, Sadao has as well. Having brought her plot events to a conclusion, Pearl Buck now ends the story with the most important thing, I think, about it, the moral questions raised. She has Sadao thinking at the very end of the story, the issue which is really at the basis of course, everything that happens in it. I wonder why I could not kill him. Why was Sadao not able to kill him? He did turn him over to the general, but he had opportunity after opportunity, including when he first found him on the beach, to make absolutely certain he would die, especially when doing the operation. It's not because he likes Americans, he thought. And once again, Buck turns away from simple sentimentality. She could have put something in like, when Sadao lived in America, he learned that Americans were nice, kind, warm people. He had happy memories of when he had lived there. No, once again, he's convincing himself he thinks the opposite. The professor at whose house he had met Hannah was a dull man, top of the last column in 489. His wife was a silly, talkative woman. And then something that was probably true. He'd had difficulty finding a place to live because he was Japanese. Americans were full of prejudice. He had despised his dirty old landlady. White people were repulsive, etc., etc. I think of the great line from Hamlet that the Queen says when the Queen in the play talks and talks about how she will never marry another man if her husband dies. The lady protests too much, methinks. Sadao is thinking so strongly, and I think the author wants us to see this. Americans are repulsive. I am superior to all white men, and all the things that the Japanese would be taught to think by that dictatorial government. That he is hiding what he has been feeling through the whole story, that this is a man, not just a white man or an American, that he was trained, and that he also has, if we can use the word, the instinct or the conscience that God put in us to treat other people lovingly. He wants to deny these things, as people in a war often feel they have to do. And what would we do? We are at war still with Muslim terrorists. Would one of us help a Muslim terrorist if he were wounded? Wouldn't we think that he would go out and blow up other people if we saved his life? What if Tom survives to join the war effort again and kills somebody Japanese? How would Sadao feel if he knew that this had happened? And yet Sadao definitely had compassion for him. At the end, when he told him to go out to the island, he didn't need to give him food. He didn't need to give him a flashlight so that he could signal. He thought over that. He had another opportunity to betray him, but he wouldn't do it. The reason why Sadao could not kill him, we can see, but it's a difficult reason. Jesus says, love your enemies. And Pearl Buck, raised by Christian parents, certainly would have remembered that sentence. Do we love our enemies in all situations? Is there a time when we shouldn't do it? Just like she leaves the fate of the soldier or the sailor, Tom, open, she leaves that question open as well. The story is ended in a very uncertain way. It's strange, Sadao thinks. I don't know why. And we don't really know why in the end either, or exactly what might be the right thing to do, and when it would be right to turn over an enemy, and when it would be wrong. And that's what makes the story of Pearl Buck's such an interesting one, and one that leaves us with such food for thought.